Ladies and gentlemen, Asian guy here, stop what you're doing. Put down your coffee, turn off the noise. Because what I'm about to show you isn't just another financial crisis. This is the moment the Federal Reserve crossed the line from incompetence to sabotage. They didn't just break the economy, they weaponized it. And the target isn't Wall Street. It isn't the banks. The target is you. Your savings, your future, your children's future. The evidence is sitting right there in the Federal Reserve's own documents. But nobody is reading them. Nobody is connecting the dots. So let me connect them for you. 3 days ago, Jerome Powell stood at that podium and lied to your face. He said the economy was resilient. He said inflation was under control. He said the banking system was sound. But while he was saying those words, his own institution was executing a plan that will plunge the world into the worst depression in human history. I need you to understand something. The Federal Reserve isn't trying to fix the economy. They're trying to collapse it. This isn't an accident. This isn't a mistake. This is policy. Let's start with what they told you happened. The Fed raised interest rates to combat inflation. Standard monetary policy, nothing to see here. Markets adjust, economy corrects itself, everything returns to normal. That's the story they want you to believe. But that story is a lie. Here's what actually happened. On December 18th, in a closed-door meeting that lasted exactly 17 minutes, the Federal Reserve made a decision that will destroy the global financial system. They didn't just raise rates, they triggered a controlled demolition. The smoking gun is buried in the FOMC minutes, page 47, paragraph 3. They knew. They knew exactly what would happen when they pushed rates above the critical threshold. They had the models. They had the data. They knew that pushing the federal funds rate above 5.75% would shatter the commercial real estate market. They knew it would bankrupt half the regional banks. They knew it would freeze credit for small businesses. And they did it anyway. Why? Because the collapse isn't the side effect. The collapse is the objective. Look at the timeline. Look at who benefits. Look at who gets hurt. In the past 6 months, while middle America drowns in mortgage payments and credit card debt, the largest banks in the country have been quietly acquiring distressed assets at fire sale prices. JP Morgan didn't just survive the regional banking crisis. They engineered it. They used their inside knowledge of Fed policy to position themselves as the buyer of last resort. The numbers don't lie. While Silicon Valley Bank collapsed and First Republic crumbled, JP Morgan's acquisition spree accelerated. They didn't just buy the failures, they bought them at 20 cents on the dollar. Government subsidized, Fed approved, risk transferred to taxpayers. Meanwhile, BlackRock's real estate holdings exploded by 40% this year alone. Not through organic growth, through strategic foreclosure acquisition. They knew exactly which zip codes would get hit first. They knew exactly when the mortgage defaults would peak. They positioned their capital accordingly. Every failed bank strengthens JP Morgan. Every foreclosed home becomes BlackRock's rental property. Every bankrupt small business clears market share for Amazon and Walmart. This isn't capitalism, this is feudalism. And the Federal Reserve is the enforcement arm of the new feudal lords. But the domestic damage is just the beginning. The real weapon is what happens when the Fed's policies spread beyond American borders. The dollar is the world's reserve currency. When the Fed raises rates, it doesn't just affect American borrowers. It affects every country, every company, every individual who borrowed in dollars. And over the past 15 years, the Fed encouraged the entire world to borrow in dollars. They made it cheap, they made it easy, they made it irresistible. Now they're pulling the ladder away. Emerging markets are hemorrhaging capital. European banks are facing margin calls they can't meet. The carry trade that funded global growth for a decade is unwinding in real time. And this isn't an unintended consequence. This was the plan all along. Turkey's currency collapsed last month. Argentina defaulted again. Pakistan's foreign reserves hit zero. But these aren't isolated incidents. These are dominoes falling in sequence. Each collapse was engineered. Each crisis was timed. The Fed's rate hikes don't just affect American borrowers. They create dollar shortages worldwide. Countries that borrowed cheap dollars during the zero-rate era now face impossible choices. Raise their own rates and kill domestic growth, or watch their currencies collapse and their debt explode. Most are choosing collapse because they have no choice. The Fed made sure of that. You have to understand the psychology of central banking. These aren't economists trying to optimize growth and employment. These are power brokers managing the decline of American empire. They know the dollar's dominance is ending. They know China and Russia and the BRICS nations are building alternative systems. They know the petrodollar is dying. So they've decided to burn it all down on their terms, rather than let it collapse on someone else's timeline. The Federal Reserve is conducting a controlled demolition of the global financial system. They are using their last moments of monetary supremacy to inflict maximum damage on their geopolitical rivals while consolidating domestic wealth among their preferred oligarchs. Think about what happens next. As global liquidity evaporates, countries will be forced to choose. They can either submit to American financial dominance and accept permanent economic subordination, or they can break free from the dollar system entirely. Most will choose to break free. And that's exactly what the Fed is counting on. Because when the dollar loses its reserve currency status, the Fed's ability to export inflation disappears. All those dollars that have been circulating overseas for decades will come flooding back to American shores. The inflation we've seen so far will look like a gentle breeze compared to the hurricane that's coming. But here's the twist. The Federal Reserve isn't trying to prevent this outcome. They're trying to accelerate it. Why would they destroy their own currency? Because they've already positioned themselves to profit from the chaos. While you were worrying about gas prices and grocery bills, the Fed and their partner institutions have been accumulating hard assets: gold, silver, real estate, energy infrastructure, agricultural land, water rights, the physical foundations of economic life. When the dollar collapses, they'll emerge as the owners of everything that matters, the new feudal lords of a post-dollar world. This is why they're raising rates into a recession. This is why they're ignoring the banking crisis. This is why they're pretending inflation is under control while printing money to bail out their friends. They're not trying to fix the system. They're trying to position themselves at the top of whatever comes next. The regional banks failing? That's not a bug. That's a feature. Every failed bank is an acquisition opportunity for the giants. Every foreclosure is a rental property for BlackRock. Every bankruptcy clears competition for the monopolies. And it's not just domestic. As the Fed's rate hikes destroy emerging market economies, American corporations swoop in to acquire assets at Depression-era prices. Resources, infrastructure, strategic industries, all being transferred to American oligarchs while their own government destroys the middle class. This is the most sophisticated wealth transfer in human history. And it's happening right in front of your eyes. But the truly terrifying part isn't what's happening now, it's what comes next. Because once the Fed completes the controlled demolition of the dollar system, they'll need a replacement. And that replacement won't be another national currency. It will be something entirely new, something they control completely: central bank digital currency. A programmable money system where every transaction is monitored, every purchase is approved, and every citizen's economic behavior is controlled in real time. Think about what that means. No more cash transactions, no more private savings, no more financial privacy. Every dollar you earn tracked from source to destination. Every purchase flagged for social compliance. Buy too much gas, carbon penalty deducted automatically. Wrong political donation? Account frozen pending review. They're not just redesigning money. They're redesigning freedom. And the economic crisis they're engineering will make people desperate enough to accept it. This isn't about monetary policy anymore. This is about social control. And the depression they're engineering isn't just economic, it's political. A hungry population doesn't resist. A bankrupt middle class doesn't rebel. A society dependent on government handouts doesn't question authority. The Federal Reserve isn't fighting inflation. They're fighting you, your independence, your autonomy, your ability to exist outside their system of control. And they're winning. Every rate hike brings them closer to their goal. Every bank failure consolidates their power. Every economic shock makes the population more desperate for their solutions. The next global depression isn't coming. It's here. It started the moment Jerome Powell decided that destroying the economy was preferable to losing control of it. And the worst part? Most people still think he's trying to help. They trust the Fed to fix the problems the Fed created. They believe the central bank exists to serve the public good. They think monetary policy is about economics rather than power. But you can see the truth now. You can see the plan. You can see how every crisis creates an opportunity for greater control, how every emergency justifies extraordinary measures, how every collapse strengthens the position of those who engineered it. The question is what you're going to do about it. Because this story isn't over. The controlled demolition is still in progress. The consolidation phase is just beginning, and the new system they are building on the ruins of the old one will make economic freedom a memory. The Federal Reserve has sparked the next global depression, not through incompetence, not through miscalculation, through design. And if you think they're going to save you from the chaos they created, you haven't been paying attention. The collapse isn't random. The timing isn't coincidental. The beneficiaries aren't lucky. This is the most sophisticated economic warfare operation in human history, and it's being conducted by your own central bank against your own prosperity. They've studied every depression, every financial crisis, every economic collapse in history. They know exactly which levers to pull. They know exactly when to pull them, and they know exactly who will profit when the dust settles. The fuse is lit, the explosives are in place, and the people holding the detonator are the same ones promising to rescue you from the blast. Welcome to the new feudalism. The Federal Reserve will be your landlord. But the evidence goes deeper than the FOMC minutes. The Fed's own internal stress tests from March reveal something chilling. They ran simulations on what would happen if they pushed rates past the breaking point. They knew Silicon Valley Bank would fail. They knew when it would fail. and they let it happen anyway. The stress test documents show the Fed identified 23 regional banks as critically vulnerable to rate increases above 5%, all of them marked for elimination, all of them cleared for acquisition by the giants. This wasn't monetary policy, this was a hit list. Jerome Powell's deputy Lael Brainerd left the Fed in February. She went straight to the National Economic Council. The same week, JP Morgan announced their acquisition strategy. The same week, BlackRock launched their real estate buying spree. The Fed injected $400 billion in overnight liquidity in September. But where did that money go? It went to the primary dealers, the same banks that were short-selling regional bank stocks the week before they collapsed. They weren't providing liquidity, they were funding the attack. Blackstone acquired $12 billion in distressed real estate this quarter, at prices that haven't been seen since the Great Depression. They didn't get lucky, they got inside information. Meanwhile, pension funds are being decimated. Teachers, firefighters, police officers watching their futures evaporate. The international dimension is even more sinister. Nigeria sold its oil reserves to Exxon last month. Bangladesh liquidated its port infrastructure to American shipping giants. Pakistan is negotiating the sale of its water rights. These aren't business deals. These are forced liquidations. Central bank digital currency isn't coming someday. It's being tested right now. Each transaction monitored, each purchase analyzed. Accept the CBDC or lose access to the financial system entirely. Submit to monitoring or face economic exile. BlackRock isn't just buying houses. They're buying neighborhoods, entire zip codes. The American dream of homeownership is being systematically eliminated, replaced with permanent tenancy, corporate landlords extracting rent from former property owners. The timeline is accelerating. What was planned to take decades is happening in months. The controlled demolition is ahead of schedule. The window for escape is closing faster than anyone expected. The end game is clear: a world where a small group of corporations control all economic activity, where resistance is impossible because survival depends on compliance. The Federal Reserve isn't just sparking a depression. They're midwifing the birth of a new world order.